How do you educate those folks? How do you assign responsibility to that as a CISO? What is your job when it comes to the plant floor? Where do you stop? You going to go all the way down to the Windows 7 machines sitting out there on the plant floor? Because most of those guys, they don't want to have anything to do with that damn box. Forget that. Keep disconnected. Hey, I'm Dino Busalaki, the Chief Technology Officer and OT guy at Velta Technology.
Hi, I'm Jim, the COO and IT guy.
And I'm Craig Duckworth, President and CEO.
You're listening to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Show.
In each episode, we bring you the inside scoop on the world of industrial cybersecurity.
We talk about everything you don't know
that you should know. So plug in and power up. The show's about to get started.
Hi, I'm Dino Busalaki, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Velta Technology. And with us today, we have Jim Cook.
Hi, I'm Jim Cook, the COO of Velta Technology, and thanks for joining us today. What are we talking about today, Dino?
I love that lead in that you go in like that. That's great. Today we're going to talk about this myth of the gaps between industrial control systems, OT, and IT.
When I saw the email and I saw that we're talking about the myth today, thought maybe we'd be talking about Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, but no, we're talking about the OT myth, right? That's the OT air gap myth, right?
We are. I think a lot of it is just the lack of communications between those two groups, right? The fact that they're not intertwined with each other in regards to the day-to-day activities of machine operations, plant production, plant floor, manufacturing. What IT is typically responsible for on their day-to-day activity as far as taking care of infrastructure that's primarily concerned about business systems.
Well, it's a great example. I was out on the floor this week and two different answers when you walked on the floor. One say, don't worry about that equipment. That equipment, not connected. It's air gap, not connected. Talk to a guy around the corner. No, all that stuff, that's connected. And even in the same facility, that communication isn't there. And that assumption of, that's air gapped doesn't stand true, does it?
No, I think it kind of boils down to responsibility, right? Who is responsible for that asset, that plant floor machine? If it's not running for whatever reason, who's got to get it back up and running? And I know IT doesn't have that job, right? And so how do they know how the OT people solve that problem? And we know there's a myriad of ways that happens, right? We find cradle point cellular modems in that machine center. We find third parties that show up with their own laptops that they allow into the plant to walk out there to plug into that machine. Or it's got some VPN concentrator in it of some sort that's allowing VPN connectivity all the way through the organization's enterprise network down to that machine center, completely invisible to IT. They don't know what they're going to. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know if they're doing upgrades, if they're changing anything, file transfer. They don't know if they're scooting around and looking at other things that shouldn't concern that third party that's looking at other machine centers in that environment just because of the way the control systems network. It's not their concern. And we see that all the time. I mean, when you really get into the nuts and bolts of it, when you're out on that plant floor and you get all the liars in the same room, as I like calling it, and to your point of your meeting last week, all of a sudden you realize that they're not on the same page.
No, I had to introduce them to each other, and I think they had worked together for years.
Right, and I've seen that too. I've witnessed that. I've met IT directors at manufacturing environments that have been there managing that infrastructure for 10 years that don't even know what a PLC or an HMI are. They don't know what those things do or what they're all about.
Yeah, it stems from, like you said, IT's not my job. OT, they're not thinking about it. They're just getting support. So nobody's asking the right questions, getting everybody in the room, introducing, hey, Steve, Bob, you guys have worked together for 5 years. Tell your version of what that machine is doing. And then suddenly that myth sort of just flutters away, right? Holy cow, we didn't even ask that question. We didn't even think about that. Hey, I want to talk about a couple of things because we always hear this, right? Because that's the not connected, right? Don't worry about that. We're air gap. We're not connected, right? A couple of scenarios that that I love to see, right? One is, no, we're not connecting. Okay. You always ask the question, how do you get remote support on that? Do you get remote? Well, yeah, if something breaks down, we got to get remote support. Well, how do they get in if it's not connected? Oh, they dial in. And we're like, well, all right. I mean, you and I got enough gray hair to remember the days of dial in, and you actually had a dial in modem and it wasn't connected and somebody dials in, but that's not the case, right? You mentioned it before, cellular modems, right? And they might use the term dial in, but hey, your machine is actually connected to the internet, via this cellular modem. Boom, the myth disappears, right?
Right.
What's another one? Another one I love, Dino, is when those devices in there, you mentioned something like VPN concentrators, maybe they're switches. Some of those have dual purpose and they have Wi-Fi capability in them. And one of the great ones we've seen is, we needed support, so we just hooked it up to the guest Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
The guest Wi-Fi, well, is that what it's for? No, but we needed support. Therefore, suddenly this machine is connected, and it was there for years, for all we know. I mean, those are some great examples of that, right? We've got others that we run in all the time when we get that answer, it's air gap, don't worry about that, right?
Well, yeah, and it's, there's a cost associated, right? Downtime is very, very expensive. And that's why that remote support is really, really important, right? Because, having a few hours of downtime can cost you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. You have a day or two of downtime can get up into the millions. And that's not a pain point that IT organizations feel, the plant. Right. And so that's why they cook up these remote access connectivity strategies into their environment, right? I've seen plant managers put in their own internet access. They didn't care what IT had to say or the enterprise. It didn't make any difference to them. If I need support, I don't want to go through all the rigmarole of trying to get somebody in here to fix this machine that's costing me $50,000 an hour. I need to get that thing back up and running. Right. And IT can pound their chest all they want. And the plant manager, that's how he gets comp. Right. That's how well that plant, operates. So
he's getting things done, right?
He's
getting stuff out the door.
And so IT at some point, they just, I don't want to say they give up, but they play in their sandbox, whatever their demarc is within that plant. Mm-hmm. And anything on the other side of that is not their problem. And so when we get into the business that we're in, when it comes to cybersecurity, we have to change this dynamic. And a lot of it is just getting these folks together and having a conversation, just like when you introduced those two guys last week to one another. Joe meets Sally, Sally meets Joe. Let's talk about what's going on in here, what's really going on in here, and start trying to determine how can we do a better job of securing and protecting this environment. What does this remote access look like? How's it being handled? I mean, we were in a client a few weeks back, and the way that they handled it is they just had cable that they would plug and unplug when they wanted that OEM in, right? The cable's just dangling inside the panel, right? This isn't a rack for you IT folks. This is a machine center out on the plant floor where PLCs and HMIs and drives are at, and there's a drop dangling in there that's coming from the IT network. That when they need that third-party support, they just walk out there and plug it into the switch out there on that floor. Right. And then nobody can see what's going on. That third party gets in there, they do what they're doing, and nobody's the wiser. You hope the controls folks who have no tools to monitor what's going on in there per se, that all they know is the filler that I had that wasn't working correctly, within an hour, they had me back up and running. That's all I care about. Now the question is, well, did they unplug the cable? They leave it in place. And nobody knows.
We've seen that.
Just hoping that whoever plugged it in was smart enough to go back out there. Remember, he tied a string on his finger or something. Say, hey, you need to go back and check that connection to make sure you pulled it off.
Yeah, another variation that's scenario where we've seen, right? They plug it in the IT network, and IT network may have some sort of blocks on it, and they can't do it. So what do? They start plugging it into stuff and see if that works. And there's vending machine networks. You mentioned even just plant managers bringing in their own internet connection, but there's vending machine networks are everywhere, right? There's actually the OT supply vending machine networks out there. And
Right,
most
the
of the
Fastenal
leading ones,
systems.
right, they're Fastenal. I mean, great systems, great concept. They bring in their own network. But if it doesn't work on the first network, they'll keep trying on that next network and they'll just plug it in, just like you said, because I got to get that machine back up and running. And we've seen that, right? We've seen cables that go off to nowhere and they say, I don't know what that's plugged into, but those guys can get in. They can get the machine working.
And then you have all these mergers and acquisitions that go on too, right? So all of a sudden you have a manufacturer that had 10 plants and now they got 15 or 18 plants that they're not really even sure what's in there. They just know what it makes. But they don't know how anything about the control system infrastructure. They don't know anything about the network that's in there running inside of that plant. There's no drawings. There's no documentation. The people that built that stuff have left long years ago. And so now the question is how do you even support that, right? How do you even manage that environment in a consistent manner for safety, quality, and from a security perspective, right? And if you can meet the first two, safety and quality, everybody seems to be happy with that. Right. But when it comes to security in that environment, and I'm talking about digital security, cybersecurity, it's tough to find an owner within the plant that owns that.
Right.
There's some executive and some team off in the ivory tower somewhere within the environment, within the organization, who kind of sort of owns that, kind of sort of. But when it comes down to that local level, there's nobody that owns it.
Right.
And that's the dynamic that has to change if you were trying to do a better job. And you're going to have to get better if you want cybersecurity insurance. You're going to have to get better if you're a publicly traded company and your company gets hacked. Now, the SEC regs, you got to tell your shareholders that, the people that buy stock in your company so that they know how good of a job you are protecting this, because we've seen brands take hits with cyber attacks, right?
Right.
Tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars.
And then the hurdles they got to go through after that, right? To get cyber insurance even after that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things is then how do you know, right? So how do you know with all these things and scenarios, right? How do you find Bigfoot? How do you find Loch Ness? Yeah, right. These myths, or how do you dispel the fact that Bigfoot doesn't or does exist or Loch Ness does in these scenarios, right? Because one of the challenge, I'll put this challenge, and we touched on, but if you ask, or if you do a survey, you send an email and say, hey, what's connected, what isn't? One of the things that we find, we'll run into the guys on the floor that are reticent that on purpose, they're going to tell you it's air gapped. Why? Because if I tell you it's connected, then your IT guys are going to come in here and disconnect it. And that's not, my issue is to keep it running, not cybersecurity. So how do you figure it out when it's difficult to get that answer and to get everybody in the same room?
Right. They definitely will try to be evasive when that question comes up, when you have people that know what they're looking for and why they're there. And I'm not talking about your system integrators that are out there just trying to help you with your control system to be able to make it run more effectively and do predictive, maintenance on it and things of that nature, to give you some level of support. But somebody who's actually looking at the bigger picture of how the control system network fits into that overall plant and how it fits into the enterprise and how it may or may not be connected to the internet. And so the key in my mind is, how do you educate those folks? How do you assign responsibility to that? As a CISO, what is your job when it comes to the plant floor? Where do you stop? You going to go all the way down to the Windows 7 machine sitting out there on the plant floor? Because most of those guys, they don't want to have anything to do with that damn box. Forget that. Keep disconnected. That's what they would tell you to do. Yeah, but it's running my packaging line. Right? That's how y'all get paid. As long as that packaging line is putting liquid in a can or a bottle or making, chemicals or meds or whatever it might be doing, they're not going to disconnect. And the recontrol effort around that could cost millions of dollars. Right. And so you're going to try to say, well, we'll just put in zero trust and call it a day. Well, then it's not going to work very well. And then we can talk about the reasons why zero trust has its challenges in that space. Again, remote support being one of them, maintenance activities being another one. when they're running around the plant trying to fix stuff, during a planned downtime, scheduled maintenance window. And all of a sudden they can't get to all the process areas, cells, zones, lines because somebody's locked them out, implementing, ACLs and or firewall rules around these zero trust strategies. And now all you're doing is slowing down my maintenance window because I only wanted to be down for 2 days and now I'm down for 4 days.
So, one of the things that I think is effective in here, because those are just tons of challenges to get to the truth. What we're finding is very valuable is to hire the Bigfoot hunters, right? To hire the guys that know where to look to ask those questions, that aren't afraid of it. And that's why we're seeing some success, because sometimes it's good to get an outsider coming down. And if it's not the CISO who doesn't think it's part of their scope, and the OT guys don't think it's part of their scope, we can come in and help facilitate that. And that's why it works so well. I like doing the simple caveman approach sometimes. Okay, is that connected? Well, then how do you do this? How do you do that? If so, can we take a look? Let's open it up and show that. And we can kind of be that investigator to get to the truth of whether Bigfoot exists. And we know where to look, and we know where those white lies are to protect production. And we're not going to stop disruption. We run into it all the time, right? We've got clients and we're helping them come up with mitigation so that you're not immediately going to disconnect it and impact disruption. But if you're just going to ignore it and pretend somebody that, they sent an email and said nothing's connected, or, we were told it's air gap, you got to go, how do you know? Well, how do you know? Have we gone through that investigation and gotten down in there with them to say, hey, how is it really happening? And it's sort of that unbiased third party look to kind of referee. I think we've even talked about refereeing. I don't know if refereeing marital counselors here is the right analogy, but a little bit of that by saying, okay, we've got some issues on both sides. Let's first start and really define what the situation is here.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we recognize is we're starting to see the landscape, the ecosystem of OT suppliers are starting to build out practices around OT cybersecurity. They got a long way to go. They do, compared to IT, who's been at it for quite a while, right? I think if you're a CISO or a CIO, you should take some comfort in knowing that that's beginning. But at the same time, back to Jim's point, you have to start looking for those organizations that are doing this type of work within your facilities, right? Who does your company buy machines from? Some are very, very specific on who they buy from, and some of them buy equipment from all over the world, just depending on the vertical that you're in. And you got a wide range of equipment coming in from Italy and Germany and South America, or are you doing your own engineering, working with integrators within your country per se, and the influence that needs to be exerted upon those groups to determine how to see what they're doing to get better, to provide cybersecurity technologies within the machine centers that you're buying, right? And that's kind of missing in this debate, right? We're not seeing that happening. We are seeing the practices being built within these organizations, within these automation technology suppliers, if you will, again, that ecosystem of OEMs and system integrators, and even the Rockwells and the Siemens and the Honeywells and the GEs and Schneiders, all of them have developed practices. You as a CISO or CIO should be investing some time and energy into those companies and who it is you're buying from. Right? Who are you buying your packaging lines from? Who's building those for you? You're not building them yourself. You're buying those from somebody else. You don't build your own car. You go buy a car. And so who are those folks? And what are you doing to improve that relationship with them if you're the one that's responsible for cybersecurity on that plant floor?
Yeah, and even with that gets to a bit of the supply chain, right? Like CISOs are thinking supply chain from a digital aspect, right? So where do I get the hardware, and where do I get this, and what component is it using, and what cloud am I dependent on? Well, this gets to supply chain of real supply chain, and I shouldn't say real, of a physical supply chain, right? Where do these machines come from? And then guess what? how are they getting remote support? How are they connecting them? Because then suddenly there's 2 and 3 layers between them and the vendor. And you should be applying some of those concepts to the new machines coming in the door, and you should be pressuring, well, one, any new purchases for those guys to have an answer for that, and two, your own internal organization, and start asking those questions, because those machines, that air gap, well, is it really an air gap? No, it's most likely not. And there are ways around, even if it's not connected to your network, there are ways around it that's connected to a network, and that should be a concern.
Right. How do you close that gap? Right. We're talking about, it started off, what is the gap? A lot of people think that their systems are air gapped, or they've got some really good stringent tools in the middle, intrusion prevention systems, firewalls that are helping them with their separation between those, or at least control the flow of data through there. But it's at that one point, right? You've got thousands of points on your plant floor, tens of thousands of points within your plant floor, depending on how big it is. How are you controlling that access? You can't just control it at one point somewhere to demarc in the plan and say, hey, I've got it figured out. I've got this firewall, even though it's got a lot of holes in it because of all the different industrial protocols and applications I got running on the plant floor. I have to open these ports up for these things to flow freely. File transfer. Do you need file transfer on your plant floor? Do you need telnet sessions on your plant floor? What ports are open down there that shouldn't be open? And if you're going to only talk to one particular machine, my filler, what are you doing in utilities? Why do they have access to utilities even though they're supposed to be working on the filler? And so all of those questions, those are the questions that we never hear IT asking, right? And OTs, I don't want to say they're not smart enough. They're production people, operations people. I just need to keep the plant running. Right. I'm not sitting here trying to chew this thing down into little bite-sized pieces to make my job more difficult in their mind, right? Security to them just gets in the way of getting things done. Right. And so you have to have that go-between those two groups. And to be honest, you won't have a practice big enough to deal with it. If you've got 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 plants in your fleet, you don't have enough people right now to do this job.
Right.
You do not have it. Right? I don't care what you say, right? Yeah. If you want to build that practice, you're talking about years, or you're going to have to start working with organizations that are doing this today.
Right. Because how many of all the plants that we've been through in all the years that we've walked in, and somebody on that facility is charged with this? Right, with this role and finding the answer and finding the myths that are out there. None, right? I mean, we haven't. We've had some that have some interest. What we get mostly is, hey, can you help us separate from the IT network? Because those guys are causing us problems, right? Which probably means that they've already started the process and plugging it in other places. But yeah, I mean, at the production, production's about efficiency and quality and safety and getting it out the door. And we haven't walked into a place that has somebody there saying, hey, I really want to clean this up and I want to answer these questions, right? They just don't exist. And that's a huge challenge. Right. And do you have the right tools in the plant?
Right, do you have the X-ray machine? Do you have the stethoscope? Do you have the MRI within your plant floor to give you actual data of what's going on inside the body of that plant? Right. And that's what's missing. And that's what we specialize in, is those systems that provide that level of visibility to determine what the ailments are within your plant. Sometimes we're not even fixing cybersecurity issues as much as we're fixing process integrity issues, just screw ups, things that are poorly configured, things that are not handling traffic properly, right? Default configurations, human error, IT scan in the network, all these other, disruptions that are going unnoticed because you don't have an X-ray machine down there on your plant floor. You don't have that stethoscope sitting down there listening to that heartbeat changing and skipping potentially, right? And the plant knows when it skips a beat because they watch their filler just tick up and all of a sudden stop running, and I got a big mess that's going to take me 2 hours to clean up before I get that thing back up and running again. And they don't know what shut it down all the time.
So we've talked about a lot, and now comes our time for a little bit of wrap up. And I'll start. I mean, we're talking about this myth. This myth exists in most organizations. I won't say all, but most organizations have a challenge to identify, whether Bigfoot is real, right? Whether the air gap is, and how is this thing connected, and how are they making those answers, and then how do you find out, My approach is, I mean, we are dealing with cats and dogs here, as we've talked about before, right? I mean, that's what we've got. And you've got to ask the questions the right way. You've got to get out on the floor and understand what they're doing and how things actually work. Don't
ask questions.
Yeah. Don't trust the answers that you're going to get through email or little forms or position statements. You got to get out there, because there's always things that we discover, that they discover when you have those conversations. When you get the cats and dogs talking to each other, you find out that, maybe some things are going on that they don't know how to go on. So, my recommendation is, air gap's a myth. You need to understand within your organization that it is a myth. Where is it at? Who's the responsible party, and how do you want to address it, and how is it addressed as an organization? And it's the things that we run into all the time. It's the things why we can really bring that value to the table, because it's opening up the panels, it's having the conversation, it's asking the right questions in the right format, getting all the people in the right room. But that's kind of my action item, for everyone listening, and trying to understand, whether or not, well, we've been told it's air gapped, but I guess we've never checked. You always like to say trust but verify. And this is a good way to verify. So with that, I'll hand it over to you and let you do your wrap up, Dino.
What I would say is a snapshot in time is not good enough anymore. For something that you think that you went through in the last quarter, last year, or 2 years ago, it's changed. And so what you thought you might have saw then is not the same today. Machines come and go in your plants all the time, again, depending on the size and scope of your facility. Not only do the machines change as far as life cycle replacement types of activity, but also the configurations of those machines, the activities of those machines. You need to stay diligent from the standpoint of really understanding how that plant floor operates from a digital perspective. And the only way to do that is to have people that are looking at it holistically from, I understand the IT piece, I understand the network, I understand the firewalls, I understand, the certain security policies and procedures and risks, but then I also need somebody to tell me how that plant operates on a daily basis, weekly basis, because things change, right? One day we're making this product, second day we're going to make that product. We're going to make a line changeover. I'm going to bring this machine in, take that one out, and I'm going to reconnect it. And you don't know what the machine that's been sitting out, what it's coming in with, because you don't know if anybody's touched it, right? And so the question becomes is, how do you stay diligent in accessing the data in that environment? And that's the hard part, in my view. And people are not doing that. That's where you need to start looking at, do I have enough people in my organization to do this? The answer is no, you don't. You have to, there has to be a few people at the plant level that's responsible for a lot of this. It's not somebody sitting in an ivory tower a country away or states away who's going to manage that plant floor at that level for it. It's not happening. Otherwise, the plant manager wouldn't be in the plant. The plant manager would be in the same spot. And that's not how you operate. The plant manager is at the facility. The GMs are at the facility. There's a reason.
That's an excellent point. You want to trust but verify, but then you got to have that continuous monitoring in place. Right. So you're building a capability out there, because it sure is a lot easier to deal with as the change comes, as opposed to trying to unwind decades and some sort of history and changes of what's going on. It becomes, changing the tires on a moving car. But if you can get those ongoing capabilities built into your organization with tools and assign roles, responsibility, and resources, you can be in a better position moving forward. So
it's a day-to-day, almost shift-to-shift kind of role.
You said shift to shift, right? With the F?
Shift. Yeah, from shifts. If you run multiple shifts in your plant, first shift might do something that second shift does, and third shift might have a different role than all of them.
I just heard you use other words before, but shift is the word you're using
Shifts.
now. Shifts, okay. All right. With that, I appreciate everyone for joining us on this episode and look forward to you joining us on whatever we might be talking about next. Dino?
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider Podcast. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to cover, please leave us a review or let us know. If you're interested in learning more about Velta Technology and how you can get safer sooner, visit veltatech.com. That's VELTA tech.com. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.